should be treating them as full, whole human beings, recognizing the wholeness, the completeness of their humanity. And this was something that I definitely struggled with at a Catholic school that had a dress code and wanted to enforce the dress code, but often at times there would be greater emphasis on paying attention to whether or not a student was following the dress code as opposed to the condition of their spirit.
Amidst all of the conversation about recruiting Black educators, where are the discussions about retention? The Exit Interview podcast was created to elevate the stories of Black teachers, professors, counselors, social workers, and administrators who have been pushed out of the traditional education space. My co-host, Kevin Adams, and me, Dr. Asia Lyons, are on a mission with our guests to inform school districts, teachers unions, families, students, educators, and others interested in understanding the challenges of retaining Black people in education. Welcome to The Exit Interview, a podcast for Black educators. Welcome back to episode 22 of The Exit Interview, a podcast for Black educators. I'm your host, Dr. Asia Lyons, and my co-host, Kevin, is nowhere to be found. So my guest and I have to go in without him, but wish him luck wherever he is. I'm here today with Janet Stickmon, and I'm really excited to hear her story, for you all to hear her story. And so we're just going to jump right in. Thank you so much for coming on our podcast today, Janet.
Oh, thank you so much, Asia, for having me.
Yeah, so start off, first things first is tell us about your story, your journey into education. What made you decide to be an educator? Was it from childhood, something you figured out later on in life? Tell us your story.
My story is somewhat checkerboarded. I actually didn't set out to be an educator. I feel like teaching found me. I did my undergrad in civil engineering at UC Irvine, and I actually started off as a math major. And it was one of those things where I ended up I loved math, but I found myself taking a class where I had to prove that zero didn't equal one. And I was like, no, I
Mm.
think need something a little more practical. So I found my way into civil engineering, loved it, and found an entry level structural engineering job after I graduated. I worked there for about 8 months and then I was laid off. The company went under. And
Oh, wow.
yeah, and I had to figure out how to eat. I had to figure out how to pay my rent. And what I did is back then I took a look at the yellow pages and I just called all these Catholic schools because I didn't have a credential. I didn't have a teaching credential. So I called up the Catholic schools and said, "Hey, are you looking for a math teacher? Are you looking for a math teacher?" And I think the first few said, "No, but we'll keep you in mind." And then I reached one that said they actually were looking for a math teacher. Their current teacher who taught fifth through eighth grade math had to get chemotherapy, and they would need a teacher for the next 6 months. And so I think I went in for an interview like the Thursday of one week, and I started working, I think around the Tuesday of the following week. It happened, it happened so fast. And that was how I ended up with my first official teaching gig. And
Hold
yeah,
on, Janet. Hold
yeah,
on one second. Let's back up a little. First
okay.
of all, shout out to the yellow pages, right?
Yes.
Because it's been a minute
Yeah.
since I've seen one.
Yeah.
And for those of us who've never seen yellow pages who are listening to the podcast, just go ahead and close up the podcast. We're not for you. Second of all, I love like the relentlessness of saying, I'm just going to figure this out. I'm just going to just keep calling and keep showing up until something happens, which mathematicians are puzzle solvers, right? It's like, how do we figure this out? I was a math major too.
Oh,
Yeah, it's like, how do we figure this out? How do we figure the brain just keeps twisting around?
yeah.
And so shout out for you for just keep showing up for yourself. So go ahead.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah, it was tough because I was trying to figure out how I don't really have a backup plan. I didn't think that this company would go under. I figured, okay, let me try teaching. And so I got the job and I taught part time and fifth through eighth graders, and they won me over. It was the best experience of my life. It was probably the hardest as well.
Sure.
I think each day I taught for about 3 hours, and it was exhausting. I had to take a nap afterward because they were busy. They were busy, but they were great. And I had to figure out, how do I take this subject matter that I absolutely love and make it something that the students comprehend, but also see if we can make that love a bit contagious. For
Yeah, I love that.
and so I had so much fun, and I didn't realize it would have such a profound impact on me. And I decided during those 6 months that what I wanted to do was teach. But it was just a matter of what I wanted to teach, because I couldn't picture myself teaching math for the rest of my life, or only math. At the time, I thought that I wanted to maybe teach theology. And I moved on and got a master's in religion and society. I packed up my bags and put everything in a U-Haul truck. This was in Southern California, drove up here to the Bay and
Mhm.
started my theology degree, or officially it's religion and society, at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. And that was around 1997 or so. And yeah, so I completed that degree, found a job at a Catholic school teaching math and religion. And the religion class was a combination of one semester social justice and the other semester history of Christianity. And
Okay, so I'm what and just to let you know, I'm the queen of let me pause you for a second or like interrupt you. So just know that about me.
sounds
So a
good.
couple of
No
things.
problem.
I'm curious to know. You went to school for civil engineering,
Mhm.
mathematics, and you moved to civil engineering. Now, when you decided, okay, I'm going to go and choose teaching, what was the conversation, if there was any, with your family around you went to school to do this and now you're going to do this? Was there any kind of conversation or did folks just say, as long as you're working, whatever makes you happy? What did that look like?
Thank you for that question. I actually was riding solo. My parents passed away when I was a teenager. My mom passed away when I was 15, and my father passed away when I was 19.
Oh,
And
wow.
by the time I graduated from college, I was riding solo. And so any decisions that I had to make, I didn't have to explain them to anyone. And as much as I most certainly, I would have loved to have my parents be there with me every step of the way and have that support and be able to bounce questions off them and get their guidance, etc. I must say, that's there was something about the fact that there was only the way forward.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
did not have to ask for anyone's permission. I didn't have to explain my decisions to anyone. I just had to check in with myself to
Yeah.
make sure that this was exactly what I wanted to do. And that was the tricky part. That was definitely the tricky part. I was trying to figure out if a particular path was the right path for me, and I think I was led by faith in a lot of ways. And of course, the guidance of different mentors and asking them questions and so on and
Sure.
so forth. And yeah, I had quite a bit of experience doing youth, or not youth ministry, campus ministry at Irvine. And I think that's where theology, the love for theology, Catholic theology developed.
Okay, awesome. So now we're at the second Catholic school and we're teaching what again?
I was teaching algebra to freshmen. I was teaching social justice and history of Christianity to juniors. And
Now, the audience is going to want to wrap their head around that conversation. So please help us with that. What did that look like? What did that feel like?
it was the first year was hard. The first year was hard, I have to admit. I remember talking to some colleagues of mine, and they said, "Listen, Janet, you never want to decide on whether or not teaching is going to be your lifelong career. You don't want to decide that in your first year. Just know that first year will probably be a trash year, and it'll be hard, difficult, probably the worst experience of your life. But just wait until the second or third year before you."
Mm.
And so I said, "Okay." And sure enough, that first year, It was so hard. I was scared to death. I remember sitting in my classroom and hearing my classroom was close to the stairwell. And as soon as the bell rang, I heard all the students come up the stair. Oh my goodness. My heart just started pounding and I was
Yes.
and it took me a while to really figure out boundaries, develop confidence as far
Yeah.
as confidence in my own command of the material. And I, after maybe the first semester, I found a certain level of comfort and but nonetheless it was extremely hard. I think that there was a certain earnestness that some of the students recognized in me. Some of them would give me a hard time, others would show up during break or lunch and ask me questions. Others, it was a combination. They enjoyed they enjoyed teasing me, which was great and frustrating.
Yeah.
I did have a I had one student who removed the doorknobs from my door. And I looked up, I was getting ready to leave the classroom. I looked up, I was like, "Where are my doorknobs?" And I see him at the back door through the window holding the doorknobs
No.
and
We need names. We need give me this child's name. We need to put them out there. They're grown now.
Jeff Williams.
Jeff Whitney. Sir, I hope you became something that involved taking things apart and putting it back together. Jeff Williams, we are shouting you out today on this podcast. Thank you for all that you are teasing.
I it was moments like that that helped me to stay in teaching. Even though that first year was so difficult, I I recognized that as an act of love.
Yes.
Because if he hated me, he wouldn't put the doorknobs back on. He would leave me sitting there. But in any case, the I think it was around the second or third year that became clear to me that I had a passion for teaching, and it
Mhm.
was clear to the students, and they responded to that passion, and they kept coming back and asking me questions. They kept on during class, being very vulnerable, especially in the social justice class. We were able to talk about everything. And
Sure.
I think there was a certain comfort that they had with each other and with me and the kind of space that I would create for them that they weren't necessarily finding it in all of their classes there at the school. And
Sure.
there were a couple that a couple of other teachers they most certainly gravitated toward, but I was humbled by the kind of respect that I received from them.
Yeah, it's interesting that you're saying this because I taught when I was teaching middle school, I taught sixth grade math and I taught social justice.
Oh, this is
Yeah,
great.
and yeah, it's wild. It's wild because I did not know this when we first started talking. And I felt like first by that time I had been teaching for maybe 10 or 11 years, some in elementary, some in middle, but the social justice class was that space
Yes.
where I just really felt like I connected with students and hopefully I don't want to assume, but they connected with me also. And you're right. The questions they would ask, they would come back. I remember one of my students, she told me, she said, I was talking to my grandmother yesterday and she said something and I told her, Grandma, you're being racist. And then she's looking at me like, are you proud of me? And I'm like, oh Lord, I'm about to get an email about this. Granny never emailed, but yeah, that those connections. And I think for a lot of students, it was a moment of you see me beyond the math, the reading, the writing, social studies, right?
Yes.
There's more to this life. There's more to education than these pieces that are on standardized tests.
Yes.
And we used to say all the time, this is the real world. As a sixth grader, you are living in the real world right now. If you're experiencing racism or sexism, or you're seeing things that are unjust and you're saying something about it or not because you're afraid or whatever, this is the real world. And so we moved in that way. We had conversation in that way. So I just want to honor you for teaching two of my favorite subjects. Yeah. So go ahead.
Thank
Mhm.
you. You just reminded me of the kind of courage that gets taught implicitly in classes like the social justice class, but I think there are ways in which that courage was implicitly communicated in in the algebra class too. And, but yeah, I mean, when we're able, I think one of my favorite things to do is just create a space where the students sit in a circle and we are able to share the deepest part of ourselves with each other, with, of course, a set of agreements. So we don't have some people trying to overstep bounds and give advice when they don't know what they're talking about, things like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
But I think there was a beauty in being able to create those spaces in the social justice classroom, but also in the algebra classroom, which was a different way. We didn't have the circle discussions necessarily, but we laughed a lot. We found ways, as I'm sure, ways to make algebra less abstract because the big
yeah.
that I got from students was, "When am I ever gonna use this? I'm never gonna use this. We can't just walk out in the world and look in the back of the book for an answer. So what is this really?" And so
Mhm.
we had to break it down. And luckily, I had the engineering background, so I was able to show them, "Hey, if you do parabolas, if you create parabolas, this is how it translates into the cables that hold up a bridge."
Sure.
And things like that. And if we were doing conversions, we would bring in, what did we do? Bring in cereal. Just and just figure out how to weigh the cereal and try to figure out how to apply that to some of the problems that we were looking at in the textbook. And so it was fun being creative and inspiring them to really think about problems and problem solving in a whole new light that engages them. And I think often at times, perhaps not so much educators, perhaps sometimes this gets lost when it comes to administrators underestimating the value of having fun in the classroom because
Yeah.
they're you want your students to feel good, and math to many students does not feel good. I found myself doing a lot of deprogramming because they walked into the classroom saying, "I hate math. I'm not
Yes.
good at math," these things. And so I had to figure out a way, perhaps not to make them love math, but have it be just a little less miserable. And
Yeah.
yeah, and yeah, it was a pleasure to be able to do that and see them as whole human beings and not just a body sitting in a desk that I need to teach and I need to give a grade to. I think there are ways in which, unfortunately, our students, especially students of color, can just get really dehumanized. And I must say, I that wasn't I wasn't fully aware of what I was doing in the moment. I couldn't tell
Mhm.
in the moment, I'm attempting to make these students feel more humanized. It's only maybe years after you reflect upon it, you're going, oh, okay, yeah. This is something that came quite naturally to me. It only made sense because how else should we treat students? We
Yeah.
should be treating them as full, whole human beings, recognizing the wholeness, the completeness of their humanity. And this was something that I definitely struggled with at a Catholic school that had a dress code and wanted to enforce the dress code, but often at times there would be greater emphasis on paying attention to whether or not a student was following the dress code as opposed to the condition of their spirit.
Sure. Oh, I love that. Yeah. And I find that in public schools too. The
Yeah.
spaghetti straps and the shorts is more important than, like you said, the full humanity of the student.
Yeah, yeah, it's because I recall students often feeling picked on because all the teacher may see is, did they have their belt on? Are their pants pleated? Is their shirt tucked in? Or whatever
Sure.
it may be. And my first question was, "Shoot, I'm glad you're here. Come on in," and
Yeah.
I'll worry about I might whisper in their ear as far as the dress code thing, but my main interest is, so how are you? I just saw
Yeah.
you. It's clear that you have tears in your eyes and your hair is a little bit disheveled and you're out of breath. I'm not going to bug you about your belt. Just come on in, have a seat.
Yeah. I love that. I
So
love that. So you tell us, like, how long did you teach before? the next question, but tell us about that piece of how long you taught at that school or just period in the K-12 arena.
I taught at that school at the high school level for 7.5 years. And toward the end of my time there, I pursued a master's degree in ethnic studies. And so that's what helped me move on to the next step, which was becoming a tenured, at that time, full time tenured track professor at Napa Valley College. And after 4 years, I received tenure. And I'm currently at Napa Valley College. It's been 17 years now teaching humanities. And within the humanities department, we expanded our ethnic studies course offerings. And it was officially in 2022, we established our ethnic studies department.
We're gonna we're gonna talk about that
Sure.
a little bit. Janet jumped ahead of me. Yeah, because we definitely want to hear about ethnic studies
Sure.
and what's going on at the college that you're working. And we also want to hear about this award you received just recently. We need to talk to the audience about that. We're going to go for a short break and then we'll get back to the podcast in a moment. All right, we're back. And Janet, I already talked to her over break about jumping ahead on my questions. So she won't do that again. Just messing with you folks. All right. So, Janet, question. So, you mentioned before the break that you went back to school to get your master's degree. And so, for the audience, can you tell us what made you decide to go into higher education versus going back into the K-12 space?
Okay. Sure. After I received my master's in ethnic studies, I realized that I wanted to teach ethnic studies. And there was far too much resistance and fear at this school when it came to
Hmm.
teaching ethnic studies. At the very end, after a number of things. At the very end, I was able to teach one ethnic studies course to, if I remember correctly, to seniors, and that was transferable to the UCs and CSUs, but as an elective. Though I was elated that I was able to finally teach that, that was my last semester there. And for me, it was too little too late,
Sure.
and not enough to keep me there, and I saw the potential of being able to not only perhaps teach ethnic studies at the community college level, but the potential for expanding it, and so the opportunity presented itself through Napa Valley College, and that was another interesting story where I just blindly sent out resumes. I just was hoping something would stick, and that college gave me a call and said that they had a position to teach humanities part-time, and so I started off as a part-timer, and then eventually a full-time position opened up, and so I
Mm,
applied and received the job and was hired.
interesting.
Yeah.
So thinking about that you said that you had some resistance happening at the school, right? Which is in my mind, when you talked about teaching social justice earlier in the conversation, I thought you would have had resistance from day one. And it sounds like it wasn't quite it built up. As much as you'd like to share it, do you have like a specific instance where you felt like, okay, this is going to be a little bit tougher to sell, or you were having some pushback that you like to share with the audience?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. One of the interesting things is that social justice in their junior year, it was part of the curriculum. And so, yeah, you would think that, okay, to offer an ethnic studies course shouldn't be that far of a jump.
Right.
But when I remember bringing a proposal to the curriculum committee, I can't remember the specifics around it, and I had a colleague with me for support. There was a lot of resistance. I do recall one administrator saying something along the lines of, we don't want our school to turn into, I won't name the school. We don't want it to turn into this other high school that did
Mm,
offer ethnic studies, but there was a lot of different racial conflicts, and but what was interesting in the mind of this particular administrator is that he attributed the conflicts to ethnic studies, and it's the other way around.
yeah,
That if there are interethnic conflicts, then what we have the beauty of ethnic studies is that it helps to create bonds across racial lines. And not only do students have the opportunity to learn and have a deeper connection to their own ethnicities, they learn more about each other's ethnicities and power structure
Yes.
and what to do with their own power within those structures, et cetera. And so there was gross misunderstanding, lack of understanding, misconception of what ethnic studies could do for our students. And, on the part of a history teacher, there was this idea that, how did it go? So I think there was some resistance to the order in which if they were to offer an ethnic studies course, they wanted to make sure that learned they were enrolled in the US history class first, and later on, and they would take ethnic studies. It was almost as
Sure.
though they wanted them to get, quote, "the real history" first.
Sure.
There was some discussion around, if I remember correctly, there's some discussion around that, and, long story short, I was able to teach a course called Ethnic Consciousness and then later Ethnic Studies as part of an activity block. This was long before it became an elective. And so, with activity, any class that's offered during an activity block, there's no credit that the student actually, gets.
Interesting.
And
Interesting.
yeah, but then later on, there was when I was trying to have the course turned into, at the very least, an elective, there were some serious discussions that I had to have with the history teacher that eventually she, I think, yielded. But I think there was some effort on her part to think that she would be the one to write up the course outline of record.
Oh, wow.
And I insisted that I should be the one to do that, and ultimately, I was able to do that and got it approved.
And like you said, a little bit too late,
Yeah,
because I can only imagine these conversations and you're thinking, I don't want to assume anything about what you're thinking, but this constant resistance from different spaces
yeah,
and folks trying to control this narrative. And I think which I can see can be difficult for some folks is if you've been in a school space for, like you said, 6, 7 years, and then all the relationships and the people, all of a sudden you're just seeing them sometimes in a different eye. Oh wow, I didn't even realize that you would be this way or you would show up in this way, which can be really hard for educators.
yeah.
And I don't want to speak for you, but I know I've talked to folks who talk about once they realize that the person they're speaking to or the group is not supporting or in the best interest of children, Black educators, children of color, fill in the blank, white children, then it's almost for some folks like a mourning, like they've lost
Yeah.
trust. It's like a death, and they have to stand around and think of what else did I miss? How it's everything is different than it was even 20 minutes ago.
Yeah, yeah. They already think that they are being replaced. What we see with white supremacists now, that whole great replacement theory.
Yeah.
And I'm just so worried that ethnic studies means their erasure. And that most certainly is not it. But I must also raise the question or pose the question to those that may have that as their initial thought, is that, why is that your first thought?
Mhm.
If you were looking at a student population that's majority students of color, and we talk about ethnic studies, and your first thought as a white teacher or white administrator is, what about me? Then how student centered are you?
Yeah.
And so, yeah,
That's
I'll leave it at that. I feel my
yeah.
pressure going up. So let me just woosah.
Yeah, keep the pressure down, keep the pressure down. I appreciate you sharing that, I really do. So then, of course, our next question is always, and we're in a part of your story where you moved on and you're going to teach at the college level. What do
Yeah.
you believe are some ways that schools, districts, schools, private schools, public unions, what they can do to keep Black educators in space, in the school space?
I think there are a number of things that administrators can do to keep Black educators. One, create an environment where our expertise is valued. Our expertise, our very being is valued, but most certainly our expertise. And I think that can be shown through just making sure that we're not incessantly scrutinized and questioned for every move we make, or at the very least, not criminalized for teaching what we're teaching. And I think it also is important to make sure that if we bring, for instance, any incidents of racial microaggressions that we experience in the workplace, it's important that we are believed
Yes.
because I can't tell you how many times, whether it be myself or colleagues of mine, may bring forward an instance of or instances of racial microaggressions,
Mm.
sexuality microaggressions, the intersection of all those things. And you bring it to an administrator and the it's met with surprise. It's met with disbelief. Oh, but that person is so nice. I can't imagine them saying something like that. Are you sure? Are you sure you read it the right way? Are you sure you interpreted it the right way? Because maybe he didn't mean it that way. And so these various ways in which we're met with disbelief, are us bringing these issues are met with disbelief, met with denial, and we're constantly gaslit. I think that needs to come to an end.
Yeah.
That has to come to an end if you want us to stay. And I think that is part of what you and I spoke about a couple months ago as far as recruitment versus retention. There are a lot of
Yes.
ways in which, a lot of ways in which institutions are moving to recruit more faculty of color to be a part of the applicant pool at the very least. And which is great. Those actions need to still take place, but we also need to bring some attention to retention. If we have Black teachers who have been hired and they're here now at the institution, what about our school environment will ensure that they'll want to stay? Do you want us to stay? Yes.
Yeah.
That is a huge question. And if we're one, not valued for our expertise, if we're two, not believed whenever we bring incidents of microaggressions to the attention of administration and all these other things, then, we very well will find someplace else to teach. And I think this is one thing that institutions need to realize about us as educators, as long as we realize this about ourselves as well, our own value, our own intrinsic value, that treat us as though we could leave tomorrow.
Yeah.
What if we
Yeah.
treat us as though we could leave tomorrow? If we left tomorrow, how would that change how you're speaking to me right now? How would that change the way you're interacting with me right now? How would that change the way you value the very things that I'm offering to our students? And I think when we consider that possibility, we'd be surprised at how that may change people's behavior. And I wish that it didn't have to take that, the fear that we would leave,
Yeah.
but sometimes it does. But I think something else that educational institutions need to know about us as educators and how to help us stay is prioritizing wellness, that wanting to make sure I mentioned already that we're valued for expertise, that we're believed, we're not gaslit, that we're not overworked, we're not exploited. Sometimes the way in which people may affirm a Black educator is by giving them more work. Oh, can you lead a workshop on this?
Pause for a minute. I have never heard anyone frame it that way. The way that folks feel like they're affirming us is to give us more invisible labor.
Yes. Yeah.
I have never I just wanted to pause for that because yeah, that is very interesting. Like, we see
Yeah.
more stuff to do because we see you. We appreciate you. We're gonna let you lead this thing.
Yeah.
Interesting. Keep
Yeah.
talking. That was great.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that's been one of my biggest frustrations, whether it be you myself or just seeing fellow colleagues go through this as well. But granted, it's wonderful. It's flattering to be given the space to have greater influence on one's colleagues and so on and so forth. But if the reward is more work, we do have to think about what kind of impact is this having on that very faculty member? What kind of additional weight, additional invisible labor, as you mentioned, is being laid upon the shoulders of this faculty member? And if this opportunity is being opened up, making sure that there's compensation then, not just
Mhm.
expecting it to be done out of the goodness of the faculty member's heart, that there has to be some compensation. I think that's also part of what I see as wellness. And not to mention also having employee assistance programs that are are good, that are solid, that have more than just simply access to 5 sessions with a therapist. Make it 10. Include an annual wellness stipend that can be used at the faculty member's discretion, as long as it's, let's say, a part of a list that is agreed upon by the institution.
Sure.
Whether it's massage, neurofeedback, you name it. I think I came across an article a while back. I wish I could remember the author, but the idea of reframing sick days as a possibility, reframing sick days and calling them wellness days.
Oh, I love that.
Opinion, maybe even take a look at the possibility of having both sick days and wellness days. That way, you don't have faculty members thinking that the only way they can take a day off is if they're sick. Most certainly, let's hope that they do have enough sick days. So if they are sick, they can take those days off. But what
Yeah.
if they want to get in front of the problem? They feel the
Yeah.
fatigue already taking a toll and they want to take a mental break, because if they don't, they are going to get sick
Yeah.
or they are going to have a mental breakdown. I think that there are a variety of ways in which in which an educational institution can demonstrate that it is prioritizing the wellness of its faculty at large, but most certainly its faculty of color. And I think that can also come with having employee resource groups or affinity groups that are supported by the institution and not seen as suspect.
I love this list. This is great. I remember my first principal in 2006, Eric Cox, who passed away some time ago. He said, "Yeah, don't forget to take mental health days."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Oh, okay." And I'm first year teacher, like, "Sure." So I was take off days when I felt like it.
Yeah.
And I remember someone saying, "You can't do that. You're not supposed to do that." And I'm like, "Mr. Cobb said I could." And
Yeah.
he's my principal. And I've done that since my first year of teaching until the year I left.
See.
And I'm so glad he was well ahead of his time on that. I'm so glad that he told me that, because you're right. There's like times where you want to get ahead of it. And a lot of times I found in education, folks don't get ahead of it. We get winter break and we get sick.
Yeah.
Fall break, sick. Spring break, because our
Yeah.
body just kept pushing and
Yes.
then we're sick the whole vacation.
Yeah, and we can't even take a real break. We can't enjoy a
Mm-mm.
break because we're sick. Our body is trying to recover. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm so glad that you had that principle, because he instilled early on that, yeah, it is important in order for you to in order for us to have be effective in the classroom, we have to be. And
Yes.
our students see that too. They learn how to be well by what we model. And if they see us pushing through sickness and illness, and they end up thinking that's how things should be. That's maybe how I should be. And that should be my approach to work as well. Let me work until I drop and then I'll rest. No,
Yeah.
I believe in a better world for our students.
We can have a whole discussion some other time about the awarding of perfect attendance and
Yeah.
how toxic that is for students
Ooh,
because it communicates you will be rewarded for not resting, for not taking a break, for not accepting some ease here and there.
that's true.
Yeah,
I hadn't thought
yeah,
about that. That is, yeah, that's brilliant. That's so true. That's so true.
yeah. It's
Love to, yeah. At a later date, I'd love to flesh that out some more.
yes, we'll have to come back. So
Okay.
let me. So our next question then is: you are alluding to this kind of through the interview. What are you doing now? What have you been up to?
So I'm still teaching. I'm still teaching at Napa Valley College. I'm still full time, but I started during the pandemic, early in the pandemic in 2020, I started a group coaching program. And so originally it was called Soul Care Power, but now it's called Center Joy Power Strategies for Healing Racial Battle Fatigue. And if I may, if I could back up to when I first learned about racial battle fatigue, I think it was
Mhm.
sometime around 2016 or so. And being able to, I think I went to a cultural center conference where they were discussing William A. Smith's work on racial battle fatigue. And I was blown away. And then I started reading his work,
Yeah.
trying to figure out, wow. So all these things that I'd been feeling up until this point, there was a name for, and not only was there a name for it, it was it was so widespread and so well researched that it had to be given a name.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes.
And so I started just really pay attention to my behavior and pay attention to my own health. I sometime I think between 2016 and 2019, I was admitted into the ER twice because of chest pain and heart palpitations and a whole bunch of different things. And I will never forget that first ER visit. I all my tests came out normal and I spoke to the doctor. I said, I'm happy that all my tests came out normal. What do you attribute the chest pain to? I knew it wasn't in my head. And
Sure.
he looked at me and he said, so how's work?
Oh,
And I wept. It was instant. And he knew exactly what question to ask me. And as soon as he asked me that question, I just burst into tears. And that's, I think, when the that's when my wellness journey began. That's when I really started being intentional about healing. And to be honest, I didn't utter the words, I'm healing my racial battle fatigue, not until 2020. It was a phone conversation with a friend. And and I remember sharing with him, I told him, I'm recovering from racial battle fatigue. I didn't even say that I have it or that I'm healing it. I said I was recovering, and which wasn't completely true. I think there was even some shame of me. It was freeing to finally say it and say it out loud. But even
mhm.
saying it out loud, I had to put that word recovering as if I had been on the journey and I'm doing far better than I was in the very beginning. So,
Sure, sure,
I
sure.
think it was a good, honest realization, but I wanted to make sure that I continued taking care of myself. But I found that colleagues of mine were getting chronically ill. They were developing chronic illnesses, similar issues to myself, faculty of color, high blood pressure, grinding of teeth, inability to sleep, all these sorts of things, and many of them dying early or dying
Yeah.
sooner than expected. And I wanted to be able to do my part to create a space where we could heal and not just end at the healing part, but move beyond healing and explore what it means to center joy in our lives, in our personal and our professional lives. And Yeah, that began in fall of 2020. And officially in 2021, I opened my consulting business, Janet Stickmon Consulting. And now what started off as a live virtual group coaching program, I had 3 cohorts successfully complete that program in the first couple of years. What started off
Nice.
as that is now fully online. So it's an online 6-week self-paced experience that has all these pre-recorded videos and audio recordings and the weekly modules, but also an opportunity monthly to do meditations and sharing circles. Clients have an opportunity to connect with each other. And so it's been an absolute pleasure and honor to be able to walk fellow professionals. And this really isn't just restricted to educators alone. Find that many of my clients were in academia, but also in tech. Some of them were physicians, some of them were ministers, and so
Sure, sure.
some of them were attorneys. And so it was it's been an honor to be able to share space and create space for them to heal and explore what it means to not only carve out space for joy, but put it first.
I love that. I love that you just made the decision to support other educators, other folks who are experiencing racial battle fatigue, folks of color. And I love the cohort model. We talked about that here in Denver. A colleague of mine, Dr. Ellie Cahill, and I have the Black Educator Wellness cohort, which is in person. And this idea of there's a concern that people may not have the capacity for meeting on a Saturday. But with a program like yours, folks can, like you said, self-paced, so they can tune in and log on whenever they would like to, and then being able to connect with other folks in the program at this monthly meditations and different sessions. I absolutely love. And you said it's called Center Joy Power.
Yes, center joy.
Yes.
And
And
oh, go ahead. Oh, I was just gonna add that this summer, what I will do, even though it will continue to be self-paced and we'll continue to have the monthly meditations and discussions for people to tap into, during the summer, I will have a special 6-week program that will still be the same modules, etc. But throughout each of the 6 weeks, there will be the live coaching at least 1 hour each week because I find that there's some that really love just being left alone and doing the work at their own
mhm,
pace. And then there are others who are just like, I want to hear what other people are going through. Is there anyone else that's having a hard time
yeah,
like me? Or I want to hear other people's success stories. That's motivating to me as well. And I have found that there are some that really are thirsting for that, and summer break will present a good opportunity for such a space. So,
I love that. I love that. That's awesome. And I think that's how we met is that I saw your posting for Center Joy Power in on LinkedIn. Someone reached out to me about racial battle fatigue, that one of your students. We made this connection and I reached out to you. And I'm glad to see that more folks are doing, like, continuing Dr. Smith's work in these actionable ways, because obviously he can only do so much. He has his he's doing his own thing. And so for us practitioners to go out and say, okay, let's keep talking about racial battle fatigue and then also doing something about it. And also reaching out to the community and saying, how do we support you? How do we help you? We believe you. That is so important.
yeah.
So thank you so much for that. I appreciate that.
No, and it's always I'm excited to find you and be able to be part of a network of educators, of entrepreneurs who specialize in racial battle fatigue and know how important this work is and know how much it's needed.
Mm.
And I agree with you that I had the pleasure, it was accidental pleasure of crossing paths with Dr. Smith when I was doing a panel, maybe I think 2021, and he shows up in the presentation and he shows up in one of the breakout sessions. And I was, of course, fangirling since then, being able to stay connected and just hear the kinds of successes and honors he's being recognized with
Yeah.
is beautiful to see. Is beautiful to see. And there's so many of us that he has inspired that I'm very to say I'm grateful for his work is probably an understatement. It was
Same.
life changing. I think it was life changing for me.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I remember when I was in grad school and I found one of his articles, 2016 article he wrote, and it actually before that's not true. Before that, I was talking to one of my mentors and he talked about racial battle fatigue and mobbing was the conversation. And then being able to talk about Dr. Smith's work in my dissertation and he's been on our podcast twice, right? And so it's just when he came on the screen, like you said, fangirling. Oh my gosh, this is a legend. I'm sure he doesn't see himself that way, but I was just like, oh my God, this is real. So we shout out to you, Dr. Smith, and I will send this to him. So our last and favorite question: what is bringing you joy these days?
I think a number of things. What brings me joy these days is swimming. That's at the top of my list. I've been a swimmer for a long time and I swim anywhere from 3 to 4 times a week. And I love it. I know that I will feel good while I'm swimming, and I know I will feel good when I'm done swimming. And so it
Yeah.
seems to be like part of my weekly ritual. I also enjoy painting miniatures. I started that during the pandemic as well. I started off with some Warhammer miniatures that my daughter didn't want to paint. She lost interest. They were sitting in the closet. It was shut down, and I was trying to figure out what to do with myself. So I started painting miniatures, and
Cool.
I loved it. I think there was something about the precision that was required to paint
Hmm.
miniatures, but also the creativity. And I moved on from painting Warhammer miniatures and started painting other things, mostly mostly women warriors. I think
Hmm.
one of the pieces that I'm most proud of is a miniature of Niobe. This is central to the Niobe comics created by Sebastian Jones. And I love not only painting it, but like creating the little landscape around her. So there's that. What else? I do parkour.
Okay, hold on now. Wait a minute.
I'm a beginning.
Wait, we went from swimming to painting miniatures to oh, yeah, and parkour, by the way. That one you should have started with the parkour, but I'm not judging. Go ahead, just keep
You
go
know,
ahead and finish.
I appreciate that. I probably didn't start off with that because I'm recovering from an injury right now.
Uh-oh, the
So
part of it.
there are definitely some questions in my head around, can I still consider myself an athlete if I'm injured? But we'll save that for another day. But yeah, that I had pulled the plantar fascia in the bottom of my right foot, but I'm recovering well, and I look forward to sometime in the next few months returning. But I when I say parkour, I don't want to misrepresent myself and my abilities by any means, because even though I've been doing it for a few years, I I stay fairly close to the ground. I'm not way up there. I'm not jumping way up between rooftops, but
Sure.
I can do, thanks to my coaches, and one particular coach, Coach Tony, has been diligent about teaching me the different moves, teaching me the different vaults and step vaults and kongs and side kongs and rolls and everything. So I'm learning how to be fluid with my body and
Sure.
and being realistic about what I can, and realistic about my capabilities and
Sure.
potential of those capabilities. I was gonna say what I can and cannot do, but that's not exactly, that's partially true, but I've noticed that parkour has been tremendously healing for me. It's helped me to be honest with myself in
Mm,
ways that sometimes I, as a woman of color, may find myself having to pretend. in the workplace. As much as I don't want to pretend, there's certain emotional safety reasons, sometimes psychological safety reasons, one may find themselves maintaining pretenses and
Yeah, yeah.
and with parkour, I don't have to do that. In fact, pretending means that I will get hurt or someone else will.
Mhm.
There's so many lessons that I'm learning, whether it be about honesty or about, oh, I'm drawing a blank. I've learned, about pushing through fear or moving or overcoming fear. I think that there are a variety of things that I've learned while training that unmistakably can spill over into the rest of my daily life.
It's interesting that you're saying that because as you're talking about that courage piece, I want to just push you and say it was always there because Yellow Pages, Janet, is the set, right? I'm just going to show up this way. I'm just going to put my applications out. It was always there. And perhaps in these years now, you've watered it so much or whatever. But I feel like, yeah, you,
Oh, I
I
appreciate
feel like
that. Thank you.
it takes a lot to say, what's plan B or
Yeah,
J or K. And you did that. So,
I
yeah,
thank you for that. No, I appreciate it. Yeah, I think I was reconnecting with something that was already there,
yeah.
was deep inside. I think that we may sometimes go through phases of our life where gems get buried and we forget those gems are there until we come up
Hmm.
against some, I like to call it in my program, site for self forgiveness. Have this opportunity to really explore something that we may be curious about, something that allows us to have fun, but we feel free to make mistakes. And I think that has been parkour for me. It has unearthed some of those deep treasures that I had lost sight of. And yeah, I definitely, I think I may even sound like a broken record to my coaches because I would all tell them thank you, whether it's through an email or whatever. It's like you have no idea how healing your gym has been for me. And maybe they do. I'm sure I'm not the first to tell them how life changing that practice has been. But yeah, it's I think those 3 things. I also practice Bikram yoga, and so I think I'm very physical. I
I
love
see that.
body, and so for me, if I'm going to be enjoying myself, it has something to do with being active.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you so much for sharing. All right, folks. So we're gonna put all of Janet's information in the show notes because I for sure want folks to utilize your courses. Super important and get ahead of that versus I don't have racial battle fatigue. Let's talk about let's talk about prepping ourselves for next school year by taking this summer to heal. And this episode will drop in the summer, so that's actually perfect. And this is just to say, this is May 2023, in case folks are hearing this, who knows when. Thank you so much, Janet, for coming on to our show. If Kevin was here, I'd tell him this to tell you thank you also. And
Thank you,
you
Asia.
yeah, of course. And have a great night.
Thank you, you too. This was an absolute pleasure, and can't wait to connect in person one day.
Yes, same. All right, folks, this was episode 22 of The Exit Interview, a podcast for Black educators. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode of The Exit Interview, a podcast for Black educators, please help support the podcast by sharing it with others, posting on social media, and leaving a rating and review. And as always, we're looking for former Black educators to interview. If that's you, send us a message on our website, exitinterviewpodcast.com.